Good morning, United States Sports Academy in Daphne, Alabama. This is Sports Talk. I'm Dr. Arthur Ogden, your moderator. And Sports Talk is a weekly presentation by the United States Sports Academy dealing with contemporary issues in sport. Each week we have a panel comprised of faculty members and staff of the Academy who have a certain expertise in the particular topic. This morning we're going to discuss the NCAA on trial. And our panel is made up of Dr. Steve Butler, who is our Dean of Academic Affairs, and Dr. Tim Foley, who is our Dean of Student Services. O'Banion's case is the first of several to challenge the NCAA. A little bit of the background. About 6 weeks ago, here on Sports Talk, we introduced the questions that are going to be raised in no less than 4 instances in which the NCAA finds itself in court. The Ed O'Banion case, which started this past Monday, the National Labor Relations Board, which declared that Northwestern's football players could be considered employees, Sean Alston, and the full cost of education, and then Jeffrey Kessler, who is naming the NCAA in 5 of the major conferences, the SEC, the Big 12, the Big 10, the ACC and the PAC, because they are cartel and unfairly cap player compensation. Some background a little bit about the O'Banion case. Ed O'Banion, some of you know, was a star basketball player at UCLA in 1975 and helped them win the national championship in basketball. The NCAA used his likeness and profited handsomely with EA Sports, and they did this long after Ed stopped playing. They've done this with a number of players long after they had stopped playing. Used their likenesses, and the NCAA keeps the money. EA Sports happens to have settled out of court, but the NCAA press continues to press this issue, clinging to its definition of amateurism. The case is being heard by the U.S. District Court Judge Claudia Wilkin in Oakland, California. It is not going to be a jury trial. The basic position of the plaintiffs, that's O'Banion and his group, is this. The NCAA is a cartel and hence by definition practicing in violation of the U.S. laws and regulations against antitrust. Secondly, the 2 obvious markets where this takes place are first, recruiting athletes, and second, market for products which are using athletes' likenesses. The defendants of the NCAA's position is this. The NCAA must preserve the concept and notion of amateurism to protect its student athletes and maintain a competitive balance among its member institutions. Second is, the NCAA says, well, this is really just a lawyer-driven case. Seems to me a very flimsy point to rest your entire argument on. Essentially, it comes down to 2 things: the notion of amateurism and the NCAA's model, which has prevailed for over 100 years. Other elements of the case: this applies only to Division I football and basketball players, men basketball players. The plaintiffs are not asking for compensation, only the freedom to be paid fairly for the use of their images. The Northwestern University Law School professor Roger Abrams, who is an expert on sport law, made this comment. O'Banion represents a watershed moment for the NCAA. When combined with the Northwestern football team unionization effort, the case raises the question whether the NCAA must totally reconceptualize its approach to regulating college athletics. And gentlemen, as an update, yesterday, the plaintiffs had economist Roger Knoll, who is a Stanford professor emeritus, on the stand talking about the monies, and of course this is in support of the position that the NCAA operates as a cartel. He made a number of points. The first is coaches are getting the money that otherwise would be given to players. Power conferences such as the Big 12, the Pac-10, the SEC, and the others want to do more for the athletes than the NCAA rule books permit in terms of student development and so forth. College sports is in no way an avocation or a hobby for athletes. It's a full-time job. And dispensing with amateurism in major entertainment sports helps, not hurts, an enterprise. So, gentlemen, here we are. I have a beef to get off first. I'm sick and tired of hearing everybody talk about this is pay for play. It's not pay for play. What it is having these student athletes the ability to get the full cost of their education. And I'm going to toss this one out to Dean Foley, and correct me if I'm wrong. The federal student aid programs, Title I and Title IV, actually have a process to build a budget for students, whether or not it's a Pell Grant or loans or whatever. And in that, they include the cost of travel and transportation. NCAA scholarships do not include this. The new programs that most of the Big Five conferences want to institute includes that. And so some of these yahoos on the talk radio shows are calling it pay for play. Give me your take on this, Steve. Tom?
One of the things, going back, I do think the Division I athletes, this is a full-time job. You know, I think the time spent, there is no time for these athletes. And answering your question, every student financial aid has a budget, and a lot of times the cost of living is much more expensive than the tuition and fees. You go to a place like Stanford, the cost of living in Palo Alto is very expensive. So I think putting this into play gives these student athletes a little better chance of living maybe somewhere even just a little below the poverty line while they're students. I mean, it's all about the well-being of the athletes, but there's got to be something done so these individuals can live.
Coach, your observations?
Well, I think, for starters, I think the NCAA could care less about the well-being of the athletes. And I think they could care less about the fact that the athletes are students. The NCAA is in it for one thing and one thing only, and that's to make as much money as they can for themselves and the power conferences. So that explains why they don't want to give the athletes any more money, because that takes away from their profits. I think the O'Bannon case is a good one because it shows the hypocrisy of the entire system, because and for the NCAA to say that it wasn't Ed O'Bannon, if you look at the EA Sports, it's kind of ridiculous. You know, I think I'm reminded of what happened last year when the NCAA announced the suspension of Johnny Manziel for half a game, and on the website, on the same page that announced the 1/2 game suspension, there's a link where you could go to the NCAA site and buy a #2 Texas A&M jersey.
Right.
When Jay Billis just went ballistic on ESPN and they took it down, but it was up there for about an hour. So that just kind of shows the hypocrisy of the NCAA. I think the fact that they're not asking for money in this case shows that it's not about pay for play, as you said. It's just about, you know, if you want to use my likeness on a game, that's fine, but I should get some compensation for it. And what's fair compensation? That's for others a lot smarter than me to determine. But I think some kind of compensation is warranted. And I think this idea of amateurism is way past being passé as far as what's reality.
Yeah, the Olympic model is one they need to adopt.
Right.
And I think that's one of the points. You know, you mentioned about whether or not they should get compensation. What about these guys that, you know, why Tressel is no longer the coach of Ohio State? Because his guys traded jerseys and their rings or something for tattoos. And that's somehow a violation. And he, you know, got in trouble because he wasn't forthright or whatever. But that just, to me, shows, and you pointed out the duplicity of the NCAA. I mean, here's an organization that is supposed to be a 501c3, not-for-profit, and yet they show revenues, excess revenues, profit of $500 million. That's $500 million. That's what their net worth is. So we move into all of this. What do you think? Where are we going to go from here, Tim?
Well, I think Dr. Butler's right on. You know, this definition of amateurism has got to change. And actually, one of the questions I asked Dr. Butler was, with the number of athletes that play Division I football are also playing minor league baseball. They're getting paid. So, I mean, what?
But Jeremy Bloom couldn't.
Yeah, Jeremy Bloom, an athlete that could not keep his money from skiing, advertising. So it's got to be across the line, and you know that has to change. It just has to change.
I was attending a Augusta Green Jackets Class A affiliate of the San Francisco Giants baseball game, and I can't remember the name of the other team, but it was the Colorado Rockies minor league team, Class A team. And batting second and playing second base was Russell Wilson. Batting third and playing right field was Kyle Parker. Russell Wilson at the time was the NC State quarterback. That's where he transferred to Wisconsin. And Kyle Parker was the Clemson quarterback. And Parker was in possession at that time of a $1 million signing bonus from the Rockies. So he with a $1 million signing bonus, in the NCAA's definition, he is still an amateur when it comes to college football because he played football the following year. He eventually opted for baseball. And that was probably a good decision for him. And Russell Wilson obviously made the right decision in opting for football. But that just kind of shows the nonsensical nature of their definition of an amateur. When a guy can sign a $1 million signing bonus to play baseball, and yet come back the following year and play football as a quote unquote amateur.
Going back to what Dr. Ogden said about Ohio State, you know, these individuals keep their jerseys. They have memorabilia. They have stuff. If they want to sell that and don't want to keep it, there shouldn't be a problem with that.
Yeah, and it's really strange. We're hinting about the notion of amateurism and how the NCAA is wanting to help student athletes. And one of the points that Noel made yesterday, and the economist Noel made in his testimony, was that the Big Five conferences have enough money to do the kinds of things. We're not talking about doling out paychecks at the end of each month. We're talking about if this kid needs money to go home to visit his mother who is sick, or his father who's having surgery, or whatever else. If there's a kid who goes to Wisconsin from Miami and doesn't have money for a winter jacket, you know, some things like that. The cost for him to get from Miami to Wisconsin, how's he supposed to get there? Hitchhike? These are very strange things. And it's because of this so-called notion, this antiquated notion of amateurism. And what this economist from Northwestern says is that the growth of the Olympics, since it changed its notion and model of amateurism, has been tremendous in terms of they're much more popular, they're much more accessible, there's much more greater growth. I mean, when people look at the Summer Olympics and they see basketball, now we can see NBA players there from all over the world playing for their countries. Well, isn't that the idea, to get the best in the world? But the NCAA has not seen it that way. I know we don't have a heck of a lot of time, and that's really, really unfortunate. But real quickly, how do you guys feel about this? The Big Five conferences, through Mike Salive and the SEC, floated this balloon out there that, well, if they're not going to, give us what we need, we may set up a Division IV.
Yeah, I really like the idea. I think those conferences are different. I would say their budgets and their revenue is more. I think their athletes probably work harder, spend more time. So I think there's a greater need to say, hey, let's make their well-being a little higher. So I see that as maybe a positive.
And those conferences do not need the NCAA.
That's true.
You know, and I think individually, the NCAA's mission is to protect the student athlete. And I think those conferences, if they did do this Division IV kind of thing, would do a much better job of looking out for the student part of the student athlete than the NCAA ever has done.
And the real sad thing is because having been there at the Division I level of administration and coaching, I can tell you the rules and regulations that are there in place presently invite all kinds of ridiculous violation. When it was Oklahoma or Oklahoma State, a couple of their ball players went to an all-you-can-eat banquet and ate more than was allowed by whose measure, I don't know, and they had to pay back $3.53. Doesn't that make the NCAA look petty? I mean, how is that
Absolutely.
protecting the student athlete? And, you know, we hear all these arguments about Title IX. Well, let me tell you something. Title IX is not going to affect this or be affected by this in any way, because Title VII, which has to do with taxation, will supersede that. At any rate, time is up, unfortunately. We want to thank you again. Any quick closing comments, Dean?
I think Mark Cuban said it best. There's no need for the NCAA to exist. None.
And
Student well-being, we got to look at it. We got to really look at the lives of these Division I athletes and their what they do on a day-to-day basis.
Brian Tim was a Division I athlete also at Kansas State. At any rate, thank you so much for tuning in. Remember, next week, Wednesday morning at 11:30 Central Time, join us here for the Sports Academy's Sports Talk. And please keep your suggestions coming in at sportstalk@ussa.edu. I'm Dr. Arthur Ogden, signing off for Sports Talk. Thanks for joining us.